All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to week 2 of our growing code course. So we are going to be building the app that you see over. I'm not sharing my screen yet, so you're not seeing anything yet. Hold on a second, let me share my screen. So the app that you see over on the right is our garden calculator app that is out in the App Store on both iOS and Android, and it lets you calculate how much soil you should buy for your raised bed. So we want to add some features into this app as well as we go along, but basically this is what we're doing is we're recreating this app. So what we have so far is this. So if you missed last week, we went through and we created the Ionic project. If you want to know more about Ionic, which you're going to need to really follow this course, you need to go back and watch week 1 to understand what Ionic is and all of that. We're not going to go too deep in Ionic today. Today, we're going to cover some basics of the UI and stuff like that, but it is important to understand that, before you continue on. So what we have so far is an image at the top. We have some text that we added down into here. It's not really doing anything yet. Last week, we just kind of got the project set up. So again, looking at what we're going to be building today, we're going to attempt to recreate this section here. So we're going to have it, we're going to add some new text in, we're going to change some styling. We're going to have some inputs in here where you can enter the different dimensions for your garden, and then we'll do the beginning of a calculation that's down here. So that's what we're going to be doing today. On the call with us today as well are my friends Patrick and April, and Matt is on the call as well, but he's not on video. So they're going to be joining along as well and asking questions if they have them as they come up, and hopefully being the voice of you in the audience. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and start building this little section of the app. So I'm going to switch back over to what we currently have. Over on the left is the code that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to keep these side by side so you can see the changes that are happening as we make code changes. I am going to make this a little bit different though, as far as size goes. That way we can see more of the code, and then I will resize this. Actually, go ahead and put this down at the bottom. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with building the inputs that we know we're going to have. So again, I'm going to be switching back and forth probably quite a bit to look at what it is that we're copying to remind myself. So if we switch over to here, we're going to have garden calculator, and then this text here of calculate the amount of soil required to fill your raised bed below. So I think we already have a card that kind of goes with that. Let's just put some text down here in the card. So to remind you where we go find the different things that we're looking for as far as Ionic is concerned, we're going to search for Ionic UI components, and what we're going to look for here is the card, because we want to put just like some text into the card. So I'm going to make this full screen for a minute so we can see what's going on. So this is basically what we want it to look like, except without an image. So this founded in text is basically what we're going for. So if I look down here, I can see the card content is supposed to go inside of one of these blocks. So I'm going to copy this, bring it over. And now inside of, oh, we already have a card content block, so that's good. I'm just going to overwrite what we had there. Okay, so, and this is where we want to put, I already forgot what we said we were going to put. So please enter the, I got to go look it up again. I'm used to having like 3 monitors when I do this, so it makes it easier to kind of see everything at once. There's not as much switching back and forth. Please calculate the amount of soil required. Calculate the amount of soil required to fill your raised bed. Okay, so if we save that and we come back over to our app, now we see that we've got it there. So we've got that knocked out of the way. That was pretty quick. One thing that's also different is this garden calculator text is black here. And on this app, we had it that color. I like it better like that. And I think I also like it better centered like that. So let's go ahead and make that change. So if we go up into garden calculator, so this is where we're getting into some styling. So there's a couple different ways that you can make style changes. I'm going to start with doing it directly in the HTML. And then we'll move things out into another place later, and we'll talk more about why you do that. So on this card title, we want to change the style. So within the brackets here for this Ion card title, we can type style equals and then quotes. And now we have a lot of different options available to us that we can change. So Visual Studio Code is going to automatically suggest things. Color is a pretty common one, so it's going to be right there. And then if you choose it, it's automatically going to put the syntax in there for you of colon, and then you put the color name. You can do just like standard colors like this. You can also do the hexadecimal value for a color. So the hexadecimal value for that color is 2CA58D. I've used that color a lot. So it's just one of those things that you memorize once you've done that a few times. So save that. And now when this refreshes, I didn't save. Now, when it refreshes, we've got the text change. So that's how you can change color. Like there's all sorts of things that you can change. So if I wanted to change something else, I could come in here and then do control space. That's going to bring down this menu of all of the different things. And I mean, just look at all of these different things you can change. There's so much you can do.
So I just wanted to add that with what you're seeing right now, the Ion card subtitle, the Ion card title, all those things, all those come with their own styles that are preset. And what Dale is doing is overriding those. So that's why when you look over there and you see Ion card subtitle, the From Seed to Spoon, and the Ion card title, Garden Calculator, all he's done is change the color. But if you notice, the font looks a little bit different. One is all caps, the other one isn't. One is larger than the other. Those are all styles that come preloaded with that tag that they're using. So I just wanted to point that out, that what Dale is doing is overriding styles that are already existing on there.
Good point. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned a shortcut to be able to find those options. Is there a place that it would be easy for beginners to find a list of those shortcuts?
So those shortcuts pop up automatically whenever you go into a field. So if I delete this and I start fresh again, so I type style equals colon. So it automatically drops them down. So that's one way that you're going to see them automatically. But if you do, like we do our CFG, now we go into here. So it doesn't drop a new one down automatically. This is where the control space bar comes in. And this is one of the important shortcuts to learn. So I may drop a lot of shortcuts along the way. I'm going to tell you when they're important. This is an important one. So control space bar is very important for auto suggesting things like this. Also, if there's an error on the screen and you do a control space on the error, it'll auto suggest a fix if it knows of one as well. So that's, I'll show you when we run into that again. I'll show you so you can see. That's an important shortcut to learn for sure. Good question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we saved that. Now we've got this over here. So what we need to look at adding now, switching back to the app again, is this little section here. So in this app, it lets you calculate based on if it's a rectangle or if it's a circle. For this week, we're going to keep it simple and we're just going to focus on rectangle. So we're not even going to build the tabs yet. We're just going to assume we're not going to build the tab part yet. We're just going to focus on building this piece right here. So we need to have 3 different input boxes, one for entering the feet, one for entering the length, one for the width, and then one for inches. One thing that I would like to make better on this app as we get further into it is making this more dynamic. So making it to where you can switch between the imperial system and the metric system. Also make it where maybe you can choose from common, like 4x8 is a pretty common one. So maybe we should just have that as a, so there's different things that I think we can do to make this better. But for now, let's just start with what we have here. So let's come over into here, look for an input. So if I go into Ion input, these are all the different input types we have available. I like the stacked label for these type of applications where you can see what we have That's what we have here, are these labels that are above it. I think that works pretty well for this circumstance. So let's find where the stacked label is. So over here on the left, they're going to have code examples, and the stacked one is what we are looking for. So I'm going to take that and copy it and then bring it over. And right now, so we have a card that is already going in here. I guess we're going to put it inside of that same card. So inside of the card content, put it right here, and let's see what that looks like if we just paste it right there. We might need to move it. Yeah, we need to move it down a little bit for sure. I'm also curious what it's going to look like when we have multiples. So I'm going to take this and make a copy of it. This is another shortcut that is super useful. Alt-Shift down in Visual Studio Code will take whatever you have selected, make a copy of it. So I'm going to undo so you can see what I did. Again, Alt-Shift and then down arrow. So it takes whatever I had copied or selected, makes a copy of it. So now let's change this to raise bed height. Start there, see how those look before we do the last one. We needed some spacing between this and this text because it's kind of running on top of it. There's a couple ways we can do that. The HTML way to do it, at least one HTML way to do it, is to put a line break. That didn't work. So sometimes in Ionic, things like the BR, oh, it did work. Okay, I just had to have two for it to really show. So that's one way that you can do some space. Another way that you can do space is with some styling. So on this Ion item, just like we did above, where we added a style, another style you can add is margin. So we can add, actually, we just want margin on the top. So margin top, and let's do 20 pixels. Okay, so that gives us basically the same effect. I think that's a better approach in this circumstance because it's a little more clear what's going on. If you were to come back and look at this code, it might be a little easier to miss the BR in there, but this makes it a little more clear what's going on. Patrick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's usually how I do it.
Cool. All right, so let's add in our last input that we've got. So width, height, so we need length, width, and then height. And height is in inches. Okay, so now we've got it where we've got our three inputs. So we can come in here and we can enter things, but nothing really happens with that yet. So what we need to do now is make it where we calculate the volume based on these three inputs. So this is where we need to do some JavaScript. Eventually, we're going to set it up so that it automatically calculates as you enter them. But for now, let's put a button in there that will do the calculate for us, so we can tie the calculation to that. So if I go over here to go to Ion button, let's just grab this block button for now. Copy this, pull it over, make it inside the content there, and calculate volume. Okay, so now we have a button for calculate volume. So what we need to do is first we need to set this data up so that these inputs, so that whenever they enter the value, it gets stored somewhere so that we can use that to calculate. Because right now, if they enter this, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just kind of in memory, but it's not something we can reference from the JavaScript. So I'm going to go full screen on the code editor so that we can see this a little better. And I'm going to go into the JavaScript file or the TypeScript file so that we can set up some properties that we can use to store this data inside of. So this is our first foray into JavaScript so far in this series. So I do want to mention, again, I think this is a good time to stop and mention freeCodeCamp. So this is a great resource for going into detail on the stuff that we're talking about. So for JavaScript stuff, that's going to be found in here. And this will take you through everything about JavaScript from the very beginning all the way through complex stuff. And you can go through and you can click on one of these lessons and it takes you through it. We're going to be touching on all different types of things that are in here, but I really suggest going through this and getting your foundations of JavaScript, buttoned down. So that's a very important thing to learn if you're gonna want to build an app. So what we're going to do is in this JavaScript file, we're going to set up some variables that we are going to use to store some of our data in. So our first variable is going to be raise bed length, and this is going to be a number. Our other one is going to be raised bed width, number, and raised bed height, number. Okay, so now we can set it up so that whenever you input something into this field, so this is an Angular thing that I'm doing right now. This ng model thing is a built-in Angular directive that lets you take the input from a field and put it directly into a variable that you've set up. And this will probably make more sense once we actually do this and you see kind of what's going on. So if I take this ng model that we just did and I copy it and change this to width, and now change this height, and then this is another one of those situations where it'll help you autocomplete too. So if you're typing it, it'll help you autocomplete it. Okay, so now we have it set up where whenever you input something into one of these inputs, it should be saving it over here in the TypeScript in one of these variables. So let's do a test so that we can actually see this, because you wouldn't be able to see this unless we actually had something that was using that. So on this button that we have here, let's go ahead and start the beginnings of our calculate volume. So what we can do is on this button, we can watch for a click event. So whenever they click on that button, we can have a function that we call. And a function is just a set of code that kind of returns back something. Again, this will make sense like once we get into it. Don't let all these buzzwords overwhelm you and confuse you, because you're maybe hearing things that you don't know what they mean, and it's fine. Once you see the concept of what we're doing, I think it'll make sense, hopefully, if I'm doing my job right.
And also, don't be afraid to take notes while we're going through this, and any words that you want to look up later on. It's also, we're going over some great basic concepts for you to go ahead and get a grasp on. So I think it's a really great idea to jot down any words you just don't understand.
Good point, April. So what we've done is we've set up, when you click on the button for calculate volume, we are going to call this code, this calculate soil volume function. So in the JavaScript file, we have this function over here. So whenever you see something like this, where you see the parentheses around text and you see the curly braces in JavaScript, this means it is a function. So what we can do is inside of this function, we can perform code that is called whenever you click. So what we're going to do is let's just log out the values that are in the inputs. By log out, I mean we're just going to log it out to like our console. So if you're in the browser, there's a console area where you can see logs and stuff. So that's what we're going to use to test. So we're going to console.log, and let's just start with raised bed length. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to console log out some text first so that we can see what it is that we're doing. And then we're going to also put out the value of the raised bed length. So this plus does not mean we are adding it together. This means that we are building a string, basically, of not a string. I'm not going to get lost in the semantics here of the words, but it does not mean we're adding things together. This just means that we are wanting to log out two separate things. So let's go ahead and copy this so that we can do each one.
Sorry to interrupt. So the plus in that instance is more like an and rather than a plus. Okay.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, you're appending on the end of the string that you're providing. So it's kind of just connecting them together to make one thing.
Okay, so now I've saved that, saved this. So now whenever you click on this, it should call this function and it should log out the values that are in here. So let's see if we did it right and if it's working. So we come into here and I'm going to enter 1, 2, 3. The console is down here. So this is where it will log if we did it right. So whenever we click on here and we see we've got raised bed length is 1, raised bed width is 2, raised bed height is 3. All right, so it did what we were hoping to do. So now we've got that data available to us to do calculations with. So what we can do is on this calculate soil volume click now, we can just do some math to figure out what the volume is. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So first, let me pause. April, are there any questions? Patrick, is there anything you think that I should go over in more detail before we start doing a calculation here?
I had to drop off a bit. My internet kicked out, but it looks pretty good.
Okay,
I
cool.
think you could maybe give a basic explanation of what the console is for beginners.
Okay, I'll try my best. Patrick, feel free to jump in if I'm butchering the answer. The console is basically a place where you get visibility into what's going on in the browser. So, you know, from things in the code, like if you put a console log or something like that, it's going to get logged down into here. It's also a place where if there's an error or something like that that happens, it's going to be put into the console as well. So typically whenever I'm developing something, I always have the console open on another screen. So if I'm full screen, I'll make it to where this is docked on another monitor, and then I have it always open so I can see if there's an error or something like that, because sometimes there may not be an error on screen, but it is in the console. So I think that's probably a high level overview of what you need to know about the console right now. I mean, I don't really do much with it beyond that. I'm sure there's other stuff you can do. I know that you can run JavaScript directly in the console if you want to do stuff. I've never really done much of that, but I know it's something that people do. So hopefully that's a good enough answer.
No, that's perfect. I recently found my developer tools on my cell phone, and that was fun. So I
Nice.
recommend anyone watching this, go check that out.
That sounds fun. I remember my first foray into developer tools was back when I used to like to go into the website for like a newspaper and like change the headline to be something else and then send a screenshot to my mom to make her think something was going on that wasn't. Like that was my first foray into developer tools, was doing that. So yeah, it's with great power comes great responsibility. You can do a lot of pranks with people with developer tools. So I'll just put that out there. So okay, so what we're going to do now is make it where we're going to calculate the volume of the raised bed now based on these inputs that we're passing in. We're going to have to do a little bit of math because we're going to have to convert to inches, but it should be pretty simple. So let's calculate our soil volume. So our soil volume is going to be let's talk about this. Okay, I haven't talked about that yet. I didn't mean to do that. That. Okay. This keyword that you're seeing right there. You have to use this. I'm gonna keep laughing every time I say this. You have to use this keyword every time you reference a variable that is set up globally. So what that means is you can have variables that are up here that are in the top of the file that are available to all functions in the file. So let me set up some some other functions here so I can kind of demonstrate what it is I'm talking about. I'm going to delete this code here because I think we've shown that. And I'm going to delete this too. And I think this, so let me show you what this means to have a global function versus a local function. So on calculate soil volume, let's set up a global variable versus a local variable. A function was the wrong word there. So I'm going to set up a local variable inside of this function. So let's say it's going to be, we're going to need a variable anyway for the results. So let's go ahead and set that up. Okay, so this soil volume variable is set up inside of this function. It is only available to this function. So if I come down into this other function and try and use soil volume, it doesn't pick it up. Or if I do this dot soil volume, that doesn't pick it up either because it's only available within this function. However, if I do one of my variables I've got up there, it is available because it's declared outside of the function globally across the entire file. So the indicator for you as to whether or not something is a global function or not is this keyword. So if you see a var or a let or a const or anything like that, that means it's going to be a global variable that is, or sorry, a local variable that is set up within a function. A global variable doesn't have all that. It's either going to be public or private. There's also some other different, like it can be an input or output or things like that, but you're not going to see like this let or anything like that. That's one way to know. And also just if it's set up outside of a function, that is a global variable. The reason why this matters is because you're going to have data that you only want available to you while you're doing a calculation. So, or while you're doing something, and then you want to throw it away whenever you're done. But you have other data that you want to use kind of across multiple different functions or across that entire page. So, Patrick, is there any input you can add on like on making maybe make this easier to understand?
Yeah, so I might be doing a little too much into the weeds, but what's important to understand is that each of these components are their own class, and the details of that isn't very necessary right now. What you need to know is that within each class there are properties and there are methods, and those properties is what you're looking at right there. That Dale has: raised bed length, raised bed width, raised bed height. Those are all going to be properties on the class tab 1 page. The methods that are underneath it, calculate soil volume, those are methods on that class. So we have to come up with a way to reference the properties on each class inside the other methods of those classes. And to do that, we reference, the class references itself by using the this keyword. So when Dale writes this dot raised bed height, what he's saying is, I want the property from this class. So there's kind of a distinction. Another thing that we might want to remember is that whenever you're setting up, whenever you're trying to decide between a global variable and a local variable, generally the global variables are going to be things that you're either taking from the template, the HTML, or that you're wanting to display on the template as well. Everything else, for the most part, can be a local variable all on its own and doesn't need to be exposed, if you will, to the other areas of the program. There's a number of reasons for that. Just the simplest reason is just simplicity. We don't want to expose a lot of variables out to other parts of the app. So that's why instead of doing soil volume as a global variable, we might want to keep that as a local variable that is only able to be used within that one method. I think I may have just explained the exact same thing you said, just a little differently, but maybe the repetition.
No, I think it's good. And I think what's good is you also used a couple different words than I did. So let me address that. So when you said methods, I said functions. Those basically mean the same thing. It's kind of in some languages they're called methods. I think there may be a little more to like the difference between them, but people use them interchangeably. So method and function, same thing. You also call these properties. I was calling them variables. Again, those are pretty interchangeable too. So like this is kind of highlights one of the challenges of learning this is there's so many different terms and you're like, well, oh, you said method, was that a function? Like, is that the same thing? So this is where it can get confusing and where you've just got to have patience with kind of working through this, and what makes it a little difficult to learn in the beginning. But once you get your head around this and understand the different concepts you have to learn, it gets a lot easier. Also, when he said template, that meant HTML. So when he said the global property needs to be available in the template, he means that it needs to be available over here to you to use in the HTML. So these variables that we set up are not available if I wanted to use that data to show in the HTML.
Excellent.
This has been one of the hardest things for me as a beginner learner, is understanding that there are a lot of words that mean the same thing as some other words. So don't get frustrated, don't get discouraged. Eventually you'll start catching on. The more you watch videos like this and the more you take in and consume that kind of education for yourself, the more those things will become familiar. And just don't bang your head against a wall trying to figure it all out right now.
So I guess I have a question about the class page there. So you're defining the variables that you're going to use in that specific tab that's there for that reason. When you have the word number there, are you telling that the properties of this specific variable are that they are a number and it should treat it like a number rather than other different categories of variable you can give to it?
Yeah, great question. So with JavaScript, you don't have to actually declare like what type this variable is, but TypeScript is what we use kind of on top of JavaScript that makes things better by doing so. So with every variable we create, we tell JavaScript or TypeScript, this is a number. Or you can also have strings, you can have Booleans, you can have like all different types, and we'll show more of those as we go through and build other stuff. We use different types of stuff, but that's all we're doing here is we're telling TypeScript this should be a number. So that if we try and assign, so if I try to do this dot raised height equals test, it's not going to let me because it says you can't do that because it's supposed to be a number. If we didn't have that there, then it would let me do that. And this is one of the frustrating things about JavaScript, especially in its early days, is it would let you do silly stuff like that, and then it would take forever to track down where the problem was. Whereas in C# and some other languages, they're what's considered strongly typed, which is what you just saw, which makes it to where you have to set the type of a variable so that the code editor and all of that makes it to where it helps you prevent errors. So that's kind of that's what we're doing there.
So, and the other question about, so your component here is tab 1 that we're working on right now. If I see if I got the terminology right. So anytime you were to create a new component, do you have to reclassify your variables for that specific component?
So these variables are only going to be available to this component. So if we want things that are shared across components, there's different ways of handling that, and we'll get more into that as we get deeper. I'll just kind of touch on it now. What you have is there's this concept of services that talk between components. So if you need this component to work with this component, you have a service in the middle that handles all the communication between the two. Okay. So because you may need to have like several components that talk or different pieces that talk to each other. So you extrapolate things out. It's like Inception almost in a way.
Is it kind of one of those things that it's better to have an idea of what you need to be services before you actually like start doing stuff? Or is it one of those things that's a little bit easier to kind of, if you figure out, oh, I actually need these two components to talk to each other. So maybe I'll kind of, you can kind of go back and work on it.
It's a little bit both, honestly. As the app builds, you'll realize that you're doing the same thing in multiple components. And then when you realize that, it might be a good idea to step back, take that code out and use a service instead. One example might be if there's a number of places in our app where we are trying to get the date and do something with the date, then instead of having to get the date and parse it out numerous times in numerous components, we might have to set up a service to do that. Another thing is whenever you are passing values between two components, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to whip up a service to do that. There are other ways to do that kind of Dale was alluding to that we'll get to later, kind of to share values among components. Because for instance, what we're in right now, we may want to share, we may want to share the amount of soil needed for something, and there's a way to pass that through other components. So So one of the good things about Angular is it's very tight in the fact that it does a lot of the stuff for you, but it still allows you to kind of be creative with it and do it the way that you want. And a lot of those concepts that you're talking about kind of come out of experience and out of letting as the app grows, kind of building it to scale. So for me and Dale, because we have a lot of experience, it's probably very easy for us to point out and say, this is probably going to be a service. This is probably going to be the way that we're going to have these components talk to each other. For somebody who's first starting out, they're probably not going to know that, and they're probably going to stick with the one method that they know how to do. And that's okay. You know, that there's nothing wrong with that. That's just part of the learning experience. But yeah, I hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, there's a lot of things that will break out into services. We may not do it when we first start. We may recognize, you know, even today when I work on apps, there's times where I recognize, you know, I'm doing this a lot. I should probably break this out. And the whole point behind a lot of that is one of the key components behind programming, which is called dry coding. And dry is basically a don't repeat yourself. So there's a number of tools that we have to make sure that we're not repeating code over and over and over again. And why do we do that? Well, if we're trying to get a date, for instance, let's stick with that example. If we're trying to get a date and we want it in a certain format. So let's say today is February the 19th, 2021. Instead of saying that, we just want the numbers 2/19/21. We can do that in a number of places. Now, once we put that code into a number of places throughout all over our app, if we want to change that and decide, you know what, I don't like the 2, and it's not exactly clear maybe to people who are overseas because they put the date before the month. Let's make it very clear what's going on. Let's put the word February before instead of the number 2. So let's change the format that our dating is. Well, now we have to go through every single place that we did that for and change the code. Whereas if those dates were all coming from one service, all we would have to do is change maybe one line of code, and now that changes the dates everywhere in our app. So that's really why we want to use and me and Dale will help identify those as we go forward. There are a number of tools that you can use and a number of coding practices that you can use to try to make it to where when you go back and make changes, you're doing it one line at a time, and you can affect your entire app by only changing one line of code. So that's really what you want to do, because what you were alluding to, as you scale and as you get bigger and you decide, well, these are the reasons that one of the big reasons is going to be, I don't want to keep repeating myself. And if I want to change a color, for instance, there's a way to change a color everywhere in the app without having to go in and change it. So yeah, that was probably more explanation than you asked for, but
no, that answers my question. I was thinking the way my thought process is this more like a foundation, and then once you build on it, is it really hard to change the foundation versus if it's more malleable? And it seems that it's much more malleable than I was initially thinking in the past.
Yep. Yeah. It's really easy to kind of implement that stuff as you go. Now, once you get the full app, if you decide to make changes, me and Dale are kind of experiencing that now with our Seed to Spoon app, where we're doing some changes to add some efficiency and make things run a little bit smoother and faster, and things with state management. Having to go back into a fully formed app and do those are kind of a pain, but that's why as you build the app, you're trying to identify those things before you get to that full scale.
In other words, the elegance of the app itself.
Exactly, and that comes with experience as well. For instance, the first iteration of Seed to Spoon looks vastly different compared to what it looks like now, because Dale's more experienced, I'm more experienced. Justin, who works with us as well on Seed to Spoon, is more experienced, and because of that, we've learned about these tools and we've included them in our code as we go along as well. So, but yeah, to go back and change those things for the kind of apps that a beginner would be working on at first, all those things should be fairly easy to implement as you're learning.
Do you have any references for beginners watching this video for cleaning up code? To be able to learn a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, like, if you're just starting out, I wouldn't focus too much on that. I would just focus on understanding the basics and then lean on, people around you that have more experience with help with that, because you can also go, into the rabbit hole of too much cleanup. And then, you know, in the beginning, when I first started getting into this, I over architected things to be too efficient in a way to where it became complicated. So it's trying to find that balance. So I would just really focus on getting things working and making that your goal, is having something that works. And then you can always go back in and make it more efficient or make it better, or refactor is what it's called. So
I would also focus on writing code that you can read, because if you're writing things and you come back and it may be super efficient. And so for instance, like there's an idea of there's kind of like a competition among coders on some sites where it's like one line code, to where you can do these crazy algorithms, but you only do it in one line. And that's really cool, and that's really interesting. And some of the methods that they use to accomplish that are really awesome. But when you go in and read that, you're going to have no idea what that says, because it's very complicated. There's a lot of methods being used they're chaining a lot of methods together. And to read that is going to be very difficult, not even just for a beginner, but even for experienced people. When I go in and see something like that, I really got to put on my thinking cap. It's not quite as easy to understand what they're trying to do than if they were to just do kind of what's more common practice. So Dale's right. There's a way to take that a little too far, in my opinion. So what I would focus on as a beginner is writing code that you can read, that you can go back, and that at looking at, you can immediately identify what you were trying to do. And if you're learning and if you're growing, it won't take but a month or two for you to go back and read code and be embarrassed by it and be like, oh, I can't believe I did it that way. This way it's so much more elegant. I mean, I cannot think of a time to where I didn't go back and look at code that was 3 or 4 months old from me that I didn't cringe and go, oh, I can't believe I did it that way. Even when I was first starting out, honestly. So as you grow and as you learn, you're going to go back and you're going to be able to change your code. I would just focus on code that you can read, because also whenever you get your job, you're going to be writing code that other people need to learn how to read too. And if you're trying to make it as concise as possible without a lot of explanations or anything like that, it's going to be very difficult for other people to read. And you don't want that. You want your code to be very easy to read and for people at first glance to understand what it is that you're trying to do. And that's why, and I don't think Dale's touched on it exactly, but he's set good examples. That's why it's very important, and this is getting off into other things a little bit, but that's why it's very important to have very good descriptive variable names and method names. So when I look at Dale's code right now, I automatically know raised bed length. Okay, well, that's obviously the variable that he's using to hold the bed length. Calculate soil volume. That's obviously the method that he's using to calculate the soil volume. And that may seem very elementary, but sometimes when you get in other people's code and they have functions called really strange things that don't really describe what it is that they're doing, it becomes very, very complicated and very frustrating to try and read and make sense. And you'll say to yourself a million times, why did they call it this? That's not what it's doing. That's not what it's holding. That's not what it's accomplishing. Why would you call it that? But that's another reason why it's very important to be very descriptive, to the point to where even maybe, raised bed length feet, very descriptive right there. It's the length, and you even have the unit of measurement in there, feet. It's excellent. Even though it's a little long, that's fine, because I don't have to guess, well, is he using inches? Is he using feet? So being as descriptive as you can within reason, I think is another way to make your code very readable. Even if you're not using the most efficient methods to do so, using very descriptive function names and variable names will make it very easy to at least somebody get an idea of what you're trying to accomplish.
Great points. I think this conversation hopefully helps everybody listening, because it really gets to the point of kind of the backbone of some of this stuff. I mean, you can learn how to make the things work and do all that kind of stuff. If you don't understand some of the concepts behind things, then you're going to be in the weeds for sure. So I'm glad you mentioned that change I made, because as I'm thinking through this next part that we're going to be doing, where we're going to be calculating the soil volume, one thing that was a little potentially confusing is we're passing in feet on these, but inches here. So just to make it a little more clear in our calculation, I renamed those. So let's do our calculation here on calculate soil volume. So we've already set up, we set up a variable for soil volume. So we have somewhere to hold our calculation when it's done. And I'm gonna do this in a series of steps, and we may consolidate it down into one, but I'm gonna be very verbose here and make it clear what we're doing here. So let's set up so soil. First, let's convert that height into feet. That way we're on the same measurement before we do our calculation. I think it'll make it a little bit easier. So raised bed height inches, I'm sorry, let raised bed height feet equals, okay. So now we've got it in a common, now we've got everything in a common measurement. So we can do soil volume equals, and it's just going to be raised by that times okay. So now if I console log out soil volume, so what we're doing here is we're setting up a variable for soil volume, which is going to be a number. And then we're setting up the raised bed height in feet, because in order for us to do our calculation, we need to be on a common unit of measurement. Now we could have done this like directly in here. So we could have done something like this instead and not even declared that variable. So we could have done that. But in my opinion, it's better to be more explicit and to set variables that say explicitly what you're doing. Maybe not in this specific situation, but just in general, this is how I like to build things. So I set variable names to make it very clear what you're doing, and you don't have logic kind of embedded in, because with this situation, you probably understand why you're doing this. But in other situations, you may not know why you're doing the divide by 12. Well, this gives you a great opportunity to name the reason why you're doing it, so that in this part, it's more clear. So if we log out the soil volume, so we've got 2, 2, and 1. Calculate, not a number. So something did not work right. So let's look and see what's going on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and debug it. So if we put a breakpoint right here, so if you hover over this point in the code editor, this lets you set a breakpoint, so you can actually step through the code and see what's going on. So I haven't created, I need to click that create launch JSON file. I'm going to choose Chrome. And then I need to change this port to 8100, because that is the port that we're running Ionic on. So now, if I click on this button, it is going to launch Chrome, and it's going to let me control Chrome from within code. So if I come down into here, 222 this time, calculate volume. So now it steps down directly into this function. We can step through and see what's going on. So if I press F10, it'll keep going and go through to the next line of code. So I'm gonna press F10. So this, we hover over that. So this is what we got for feet. Oh, because I passed in inches. So yeah, that's why that makes sense. Okay. So I'm glad I named it that way, because even this simple of data can be confusing. So we log out, soil volume. According to these logs, it looks like everything is working. Patrick, do you see what's going on? Is it just was it a refresh issue? Let's see if it's there now. Yeah, it's there now. So something just wasn't refreshed, but it gave us an opportunity to see how the debugger works. So what we have now is this console log is spitting out our soil volume. So if I put these side by side again, and that looks horrible, let me stop the debugger now and make things a little bit smaller so we can see what's going on. Okay, so now we're back to having our app on the right, and we've got our JavaScript on the left. Make sure it's still working again, and it's going to be So 8 by 4 by 12 is the most common raised bed type. So let's use that for testing. All right, so 32. So now what we need to do is we need to display the calculated result somewhere. So I'm going to go full screen on the code again. I hope this doesn't bug y'all, me switching around so much. It's just kind of second nature. And I do have an OCD thing where the TypeScript has to be on the right side and the HTML has to be on the left. I cannot operate any other way. So, okay, so now so the last thing we're going to do on this video is we're going to display this soil volume that we just calculated. So what we're going to do is, instead of soil volume being a local variable that is only available within this function, we want it to be available over in the HTML so that we can reference it. So let me show you what I'm talking about as far as this whole global versus variable. I think this will make it very clear how that works. So let's look at where we want to put calculate volume. We'll put it below the button for now. It's not going to be where it lives forever, but we'll put one there. We'll just put a P element. This is just a paragraph element. Actually, I think Ionic wants you to do Ion text for text areas. Probably should have done that up here too. So I'll go back and fix that. So Ion text, and then inside of here. So if we want to reference a variable that is in the TypeScript and we want to display it over here, but not make it where they can change it, then this is the Angular thing we do. And there's not a lot of different Angular syntax things you have to learn. So I know that you keep like seeing new ones, and you're like, when is this going to end? It ends pretty soon. So don't feel like you got to keep staying on top of all these things. So if we go in here and try and use soil volume, we get an error. So however, that soil volume does not exist on type tab 1 page. You say, yes, it does. It's right there. Well, the problem we're running into is that this is only available to this function. It's not available anywhere else. So what we need to do is, instead, we'll come up here. We'll set a global variable for soil volume. We will delete this. Now we're going to get an error here because it doesn't know what we're talking about. But if we add the this keyword, which references global, now it's going to be there. And now over here, this error has gone away because it's able to find this soil volume property. So if we save both of these, then what this does is it makes it where the value will be displayed within these double brackets in the HTML. So again, to rehash, this is the display and only display it. They cannot change it. They can only look at it. If you want it to be where they can change it, you do this. And these are called bindings. Let me go to a page so you can see. So if you Google Angular bindings, this is where you can learn more about the binding syntax. But really what you just saw is what you need to know. I don't know why that page isn't loading, but just Google that and you'll get to more about it. But really what you need to know is what I just showed you. So ng model, and then this double squiggly for binding just the data over to view. So now if we switch over to the app again, got it on the right. So we'll do 8 times 4, 12, calculate volume, and now we've got 32. So we probably want to add a little bit of text around it and make it look a little better because it's like all the way over to the left. We probably want to do some other stuff. So let's do some styling, and then we'll call this one good for the week. So let's come in here. The calculated soil volume is, and you can just kind of intermix in stuff you type. And then if you want to pull something over from the TypeScript, it goes there. We want this to be centered. So style text align. You'll learn and memorize these properties as you use them more. Like I use pretty much the same ones over and over. It's not often that I'm going into properties I don't use much. But if you don't know what it is, you can just kind of say, if I didn't know it was center or text align.
I'll also say that they're very easy to find when you Google them as well. So if you're trying to change something, it's pretty easy to jump into Google and say, how do I align text using HTML or CSS? And it'll tell you almost right out the gate.
HTML, how to align text. first result.
Yep,
right there.
there you go. So it's really easy to, if you ever wonder how to do something, just Google it. It's pretty easy to find.
Okay, so a bug I see right now is it's showing this calculated soil volume is, even though there's no results. So let's make it so that this only shows once you've calculated a volume. So the way that we can do that is we come over here, is ngIf. It's another Angular thing, but it lets us hide or show things based on different conditions. So what we're going to do is ngIf soil volume not equal to null. So this is going to hide. Am I doing that? Am I backwards? ngIf hide if it is null, not equal to null. Okay. So never mind, I was backwards. Not null. This is where it gets confusing, is on this one. So we're going to hide it if it's not null. Okay, so now we don't have it. We do length of 8, width of 4, inches 12. Boom. Now we got it. Let's make it look a little better, like maybe be like bigger text, and maybe
I don't think the text centered the way it was supposed to either.
Yeah, you're right. It's not centered. So let's throw an element, because right now we're in Ion text. Really, this wants us to have like an individual element within Ion text. So let's try that, and we'll put the style on P element. And let's try that. Did it already refresh? It's so fast. I'm used to this big project I work on that takes a few minutes to refresh. Okay, so it's centered now. A P element is paragraph text. We want this to be bigger. Let's go with H2. This is heading 2. There's H1 through H6, just going up in size. H1 is the biggest, H6 being the smallest. Let's see what an H2 looks like. Better, let's go up to H1, and let's also give it some space because it's a little close to that button. So let's set, just like we did earlier, margin top. Let's try 20 pixels. And eight, 4, 12. Well, now it's too big. So go back to H2, maybe 40 pixels, because, and I don't think that margin was set on, I don't think it was even working. I think we need to set it on the actual element itself. So I'm gonna set it here.
This might be a silly question, but is there a best practice to like use margin top versus margin bottom on stuff? So like you could put margin bottom on the button as opposed to margin top, but is there like just a better way that people just assume to do it?
That's a great question, and I don't know if there is like a standard. I mean, I don't even know if I can articulate how or when I do it. I think I typically am going with margin top more than bottom. The way I try and think about it is I put the margin on the element that I want to be different, not necessarily the things that are around it. So if this is too close to that button, I want to move this. So I'm going to set it on that. So I think that contributes to me usually doing top more than bottom, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Cool. I think that looks better. So I think that's probably a good stopping point. One other thing, I want to make that button a different color. Let's see how easy it is to do that, because we got 2 different blues going on. So let's look up how to change an Ionic button color. It may be really simple. Okay, so we just need to set the so the primary color. One of the cool things about Ionic too is it has this whole concept of like a theme. So if you go into this variables.scss file, then you can change the theme colors. So primary is the default button color, so it's there. So if I wanted to generate a new theme, you can go and search for Ionic theme generator, and then this color generator here. So I can come in here and type 2CA58D. Okay, so now because there's all these other like shades and stuff that I'd have to like figure out how to do on my own. But if I do this, then it automatically does it for you. You used to be able to name the one. I'm just going to, for now, just copy this over so that I can go back and change that. I'm just going to set that there so that you can see the button change, and I'll figure out the shade thing later. So now we've got the button change just by changing it there, because that's the primary color. So I'm pretty happy with where we are, I think, so far. Another thing we need to do is I need to crop this image down because it has a bunch of white space around the image itself. That's not something I can do in code. I just need to crop that actual image down. And then I think that's a good stopping point for this week. So I think we covered a lot of good stuff today. We covered, let me pull it back up again. So we covered some JavaScript. We covered how to bind the HTML to the JavaScript. Covered functions, properties, console, a lot of stuff. Matt, April, y'all have any questions or anything that y'all think we should go over before we end this video?
No, I any question I had, I asked.
Appreciate everything.
I think it was great. And also I just want to remind everyone that's watching right now, if you have any questions, you can ask in the comments and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. We'll keep the discussion up.
Yep. All right, well, we will call this video good for this week. Next week, we will continue building out the UI. We'll, yeah, I don't know. We'll see where we end up doing next week, but we'll keep building on it like we did this week. So thanks everyone for watching. Like April said, if you have any questions, just leave comments down in the YouTube comments. So we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.